All right, guys, it is time for another tutorial for a Bible clip card. It's based on John 14, 1 through 14, where Jesus talks about, he's telling the disciples about how we have the power of heaven in our hands. All we have to do is believe in him, and he will do anything that we ask as long as we have a belief in him. And so I wanted to remind myself that my belief in Jesus is full of power, and so I decided to do a clip card today. And what I did was I took a piece of just watercolor paper. It's pretty heavy watercolor paper, and I pulled my distress inks out, and I wanted to use some semi-bright colors to start with, and then kind of overlay it with a little bit of darker colors to bring it out into kind of a distressed, rough look. And I wanted to put textures on it today. So I went ahead and just sprayed with water and patted it down and dried in between each layer until I finally got the whole thing covered the way that I wanted to. I did bring in some pink at the very end to just kind of brighten it up just a tad, and sprayed that with water and put that all around. You just have to be patient when you're doing this kind of background because it does have to dry in between. I did put a little bit of pink without the water mixed into it, so it would have a little bit more brighter color, and then I sprayed the whole thing with water so it would blend really well, so it didn't have like definite lines. Then I took my vintage photo and I did a border around the edges so that it would kind of darken it up and frame it out, because I wanted it to have that framed look. And so I did that with the vintage photo, and then I did some splashes of the vintage photo color onto the paper and the background. So I just wanted to kind of bring that frame into the rest of the photo or the clip card. So I went ahead and put some splashes of that on there. Then I decided I wanted to add a texture because I did want to have some texture today. So I did some embossing ink and some red embossing powder on the edge so that it has a little bit of texture on the edge. It's a pattern of just circles. And then I took my, I don't know, it's just like a little squiggly swirly thing, stamp, and I put some gold embossing powder on that, and it brings out a little bit of texture in there. So then I heated up with my embossing pen, I heated up with my heat gun, and what that does is it makes that embossing powder melt and raise up, and it gives it a really cool little texture. So you just have to be patient. You don't want to burn your paper, so you have to kind of move it, but it has to get hot enough to actually melt the embossing paper. So there you can kind of see where the texture is of that gold and that red. Came out really cool. I really like the way that it turned out. And then I took the same colors in my archival inks and just started kind of stamping some of those swirlies around that were a little bit smaller than the embossing ones that I used, just to kind of give it a little bit more depth. And then I decided to give it some just some extra around the edges with this red Ranger ink. So I just used a credit card and made some little slashes and marks across there. And then I decided I really wanted to work on like the power of heaven coming down. So I wanted to have something that kind of indicated that, you know, we get our power from our belief in Jesus, and the fact that we can look up and we can ask for things in his name, and he will provide those for us, and he's promised us that in his belief. So I went ahead and just did some acrylic yellow and orange in the shape of like rays of the sun, and then I wiped it off with the credit card so it wasn't too thick. So it's very subtle, but when you look at the card itself, it's really, really neat the way that it's coming out. And then later, right here, I'm putting on this, it's just kind of a textured, like, I don't know, it's not really glitter because it's not sparkly, but it's a texture that kind of makes it feel like carpet, or I'm not even really sure how to describe it, but anyway, and I put that on there so it kind of gave it some more texture and a raised surface. And then I did spray that with some clear sealer so that it won't come off. And then I decided I printed "Belief Is" off of my label maker, and I distressed it with my inks, and then I stuck that down. And then I decided it still stood out too much, so I took my black big brush pen and I went around the edges just like I do when I'm, you know, creating shadows and some of my other stuff that you've seen me do. So that kind of made that blend a little bit more into the paper. And then I decided to stamp the power in big letters because I wanted power to show up. So I stamped the word power. I did use a heart for the O just because God's love is what gives us that power, and so I thought that was a really cool touch. And then I wrote in the scripture reference at the end. Now, once I got finished with that, I decided that it really wasn't, sorry, at the time my camera kind of froze up here, and so I didn't want to, I couldn't delete it off there, so I'm sorry about that. But anyway, what I did next was I sprayed it with some misting spray. It was like a glimmer mist spray, and I dried it, so it's got kind of a shimmery look to it, but you can't really see that in the video, but it's pretty cool. It's got like a shiny little shimmery, just subtleness to it. And then I re-went over my scripture because that wasn't waterproof ink that I used, so when I sprayed it, it kind of smeared, so I went over it again. And then I decided to add some black splatters of some acrylic paint just to kind of blend it all together and bring everything into one cohesive photo. And then I decided that the power was kind of bland, so I wanted to, I forgot, I did put some, a little bit darker border with my big brush pen around the edge of the card just to kind of give it a little bit more of a definite frame to it, so it didn't, so that you could kind of, it just darkened up the edges a little bit. And then I decided the power was kind of boring, so I took my ink pen, my white ink pen, and I added some highlights on the words on each of the letters with my ink pen, and then I mixed some white of my ink pen and I took my black brush that had black in it and kind of mixed it together and put in some gray splatters. So, and that's how I kind of finalized that. Once I was done, I went ahead and created my my paper clip with my ribbon, and I pinned it into my Bible. I later decided that it should go on the other page, so I did move it to the other page so that I could see it a little bit better, but here's some close-ups. I hope that you guys got inspired by that, and I hope that you will go and try that on your own. Have a great day.